Story number 1. The Whispering House. Amelia had never believed in the supernatural. Ghost stories were for campfires and children, not practical-minded adults like her. So when she inherited her grandmother's old, decrepit house on the outskirts of town, she shrugged off the rumors about it being haunted. It was just an empty house. At least, that's what she thought. The first night there, the house seemed to breathe. Floorboards creaked despite her being alone, and the wind whispered through the cracks in the walls like a soft, unintelligible conversation. Amelia blamed the draft and tried to sleep, but the unease clung to her skin. On the second night, she heard it clearly, a low murmur from the hallway just outside her bedroom door. Heart pounding, she sat up in bed, straining to listen. The whispering grew louder, but remained indistinct, like a secret shared between unseen lips. She convinced herself it was the wind again, a trick of her mind playing on her nerves. She turned on the bedside lamp, but the light flickered and went out. She sat in darkness, gripping the sheets, listening. The whispering came closer. On the third night, the whispers called her name. Amelia, Amelia. The voice was soft but insistent, wrapping around her like cold fingers. It no longer came from outside her door, but inside her room, mere feet away. Terrified, she bolted upright and saw the outline of a figure standing in the corner of her room, just beyond the reach of the moonlight spilling through the window. She froze, breath caught in her throat. The figure didn't move, but the whispering continued, louder now, more urgent. Amelia. Unable to move, she watched as the figure slowly stepped into the light. It was her grandmother, or at least something that resembled her, skin pale and stretched tight across her bones, eyes sunken and black. "Come with me," the figure whispered, extending a withered hand. The air grew thick with the stench of decay. Amelia screamed, scrambling off the bed and fleeing the room. She ran down the stairs, but the house had changed. Doorways led to dead ends, and hallways twisted into each other like a labyrinth. Behind her, the whispers followed. She stumbled into the kitchen, heart racing, and slammed the door shut. For a moment there was silence. Then, softly at first, but rising in intensity, the whispering returned. From behind the door she heard the slow, deliberate creak of footsteps. Amelia. It's time. The door rattled, and the whispering grew louder until it filled the room. She covered her ears, desperate to block it out, but it seeped into her mind like poison, her name echoing over and over. The door burst open, and the figure stood there once more, grinning with hollow eyes. As the darkness enveloped her, the last thing Amelia heard was the whisper of her name, soft, almost tender, as it lulled her into silence. Story number 2. A midnight visitor. Evan had always been a light sleeper, but since moving into his new apartment, his nights had been filled with restless tossing and turning. It wasn't the creaking pipes or the distant hum of the city that kept him awake. It was something else, something more unsettling. Every night, without fail, he awoke at precisely 3:12. It started with a faint tapping. The first time he heard it, he brushed it off as a tree branch against the window. But then the tapping began to move. First at the window, then at the door, then of the door, then from inside the walls, creeping closer to his bed like a heartbeat in the dark. Tap, tap, tap. On the third night, he decided to investigate. The apartment was small, sparsely furnished, with only the essentials, a couch, a table, a bed. Nothing that could make such persistent noise. At 3:12 am, the tapping returned, louder this time. Even sat up, heart pounding, and listened. It was coming from the front door. He crept to the door, every muscle in his body tense. Slowly, he leaned his ear against it. The tapping stopped. Holding his breath, he looked through the peephole and saw nothing. Just the dimly lit hallway of his building, empty and still. He shook his head, cursing his overactive imagination, and turned to head back to bed. But as he stepped away from the door, A knock echoed through the apartment. Not a tap, but a heavy, deliberate knock. Frozen in place, Evan stared at the door. He waited, listening. Another knock. Louder. His hand hovered over the doorknob, hesitating. Should he open it? Third knock, followed by a voice. A low, rasping whisper that slithered through the door like cold air. "Let me in." Evan stumbled back, his heart racing. The voice was neither familiar nor human. It was thick with malice, a sound that made his skin crawl. He grabbed a chair and wedged it under the doorknob, hoping to barricade whatever was on the other side. But the knocking didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent, as if the door was about to be shattered by the force behind it. "Let me in," the voice demanded again, more forceful now, angry. Evan backed into his bedroom and locked the door. He fumbled for his phone, but the screen remained black, unresponsive. The knocking echoed through the apartment, shaking the walls. He curled up in his bed, hands over his ears, trying to block out the sound. But then, as suddenly as it began, the knocking stopped. Silence settled over the room. He didn't dare move. Then came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate. They crossed the living room and stopped just outside his bedroom door. Evan squeezed his eyes shut, praying it was a dream, a figment of his tired mind. But the voice returned, softer now, but filled with a chilling hunger. "I'm already inside." Evan's blood ran cold. He bolted upright, eyes scanning the dark room. There, in the corner, stood a figure, tall and shadowy, watching him with glowing eyes. The door to his bedroom had never opened, but somehow it was here, standing in his room, grinning. He tried to scream, but his voice was trapped in his throat. The figure stepped forward, and as it did, Evan felt the air in the room grow thick and cold, the walls closing in around him. The last thing he saw was the figure reaching out toward him with long, bony fingers, whispering in that same terrible voice. "Now you're mine." In the morning, Evan's apartment was quiet. The door to his bedroom was locked from the inside, and his bed was empty, the sheets tangled as though something had dragged them away. The only trace of him was a single, low whisper that lingered in the air, barely audible to anyone who entered. And at 3:12 am, the tapping began again. Story number 3. Our reflections at midnight. Kara had always been indifferent toward mirrors. They were just objects, glass and silver, reflections of reality. But after moving into her new apartment, she found herself avoiding the old, antique mirror that hung in her bedroom. It wasn't anything specific that put her off. It just felt wrong, like it was watching her. She ignored the feeling for days, convincing herself it was nothing. But at night, things were different. Every night, at precisely midnight, she would wake up to a soft sound, like someone brushing against glass. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, or maybe the wind against the window. But as the nights passed, the noise became more distinct, like a finger slowly dragging across a mirror's surface. On the fourth night, her curiosity got the best of her. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound to come again. As the clock struck midnight, she heard it, a faint, scraping noise coming from the mirror. It was soft but unmistakable. She turned toward the mirror, her heart pounding. In the dim light of the room, she could see her reflection. But something was off. The air felt thick, the shadows heavier than usual. Then she noticed it. Her reflection wasn't moving. Kara blinked, sitting up in bed. Her heart raced as she stared at the mirror. She was certain she had just moved, but her reflection remained still. Its eyes locked on hers. Slowly, her reflection smiled, the corners of its mouth twisting up in a way that made her stomach turn. She hadn't smiled. Frightened, she scrambled out of bed and backed away from the mirror. Her reflection didn't follow. It stood there grinning, eyes dark and menacing. She felt a chill creep up her spine as the reflection's smile widened unnaturally, stretching across its face like a crack in glass. Then it spoke. "Come closer," it whispered. its voice soft but dripping with malice. Kara shook her head, her hands trembling. She wanted to run, to get out of the room, but her feet felt rooted to the floor. The reflection leaned forward, pressing its hands against the other side of the glass, as though it were testing the barrier between them. "You can't hide from me," it said, its voice a low, menacing rasp. "I'm you." She tried to turn away, but her reflection's eyes held her captive. It was then that she noticed something horrifying. There was a crack in the glass, a thin fracture spreading from the corner of the mirror. As she watched in terror, the crack slowly widened, splintering across the surface like a spider web. And then, with a sudden, sharp sound, the mirror shattered, but not outward. Instead, the shards seemed to collapse inward, like something was pulling them into the mirror's depths. Kara gasped, stumbling back, but it was too late. A hand emerged from the broken mirror, pale and thin, its fingers unnaturally long. It grasped the edge of the mirror's frame and pulled itself forward. Her reflection, or what had once been her reflection, began to crawl out of the mirror, its body contorting as it forced its way into the room. Its smile remained fixed, eyes gleaming with hunger. Kara screamed and turned to run, but she tripped over the edge of the bed, falling to the floor. She scrambled to her feet, heart pounding in her chest. But when she looked back, the thing from the mirror was standing over her, its face twisted into a grotesque mockery of her own. "Time to switch places," it hissed. Before Kara could react, the creature lunged at her, cold hands grasping her wrists. She struggled, kicking and thrashing, but its grip was impossibly strong. Slowly, it began to drag her toward the mirror. The broken shards glittered on the floor, but beyond them, the mirror itself seemed whole again, a dark void beckoning her inside. "No!" Kara cried, digging her nails into the floorboards, but the creature only laughed, pulling her closer. Her skin prickled as the air around her grew colder, and with one final, desperate scream, she was pulled through the glass. Everything went silent. The mirror stood in the empty room, whole and unbroken, as if nothing had happened. In the reflection, Kara stood perfectly still, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth twisted into a silent scream. She watched the room from the other side, trapped in a world of glass. And at midnight, the scratching began again. But this time, it was her hand on the other side of the mirror, clawing for a way out. Story number 4. To the Night Road. The clock on the dashboard blinked 11:42 p.m. as Ben drove down the desolate highway, flanked on both sides by dense jungle. The road trip had been long and exhausting, but he was determined to reach the small town on the other side of the forest by morning. His only company was the rhythmic hum of his car's engine and the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees. The road had been empty for miles, not a single car or person in sight, and the thick canopy of trees overhead blocked out the moonlight, casting the road in an eerie, shadowy glow. Ben adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, trying to shake off the creeping unease that had settled over him since entering the jungle. It was just another dark stretch of road, he told himself. He'd been on plenty of them before. But this one felt different. As the minutes ticked by, a thick fog began to roll in, its white tendrils curling across the road and swallowing up the trees in the distance. Ben slowed down, squinting to see through the fog. The mist clung to his windshield, making the jungle seem alive, shifting and breathing just beyond the glass. Then he saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road. Ben slammed on the brakes, tires screeching as his car came to a halt just feet away from the figure. His heart pounded in his chest as he stared out into the fog. The figure was tall and thin, almost emaciated, with long, wild hair that hung down to its shoulders. It stood completely still, its face obscured by the shadows. He rolled down his window slightly, hesitating for a moment before calling out, "Hey, do you need help?" The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, silent and unmoving. Ben's skin prickled with unease. He glanced around, expecting someone to jump out of the fog, but there was nothing, just the figure, the mist, and the jungle pressing in on all sides. He honked the horn, hoping to get some reaction. Still, nothing. A strange thought crept into his mind. What if this thing isn't human? His rational side tried to dismiss it, but the air felt wrong, heavy with something he couldn't name. Suddenly, the figure began to move, slowly at first, then faster. It bolted towards the side of the road, disappearing into the jungle with a fluid, unnatural grace. Ben's heart pounded as he watched it vanish into the trees. His instinct screamed at him to drive, to get out of there as fast as possible, but before he could move, he heard it. A soft, whispering voice. "Help me." It was faint, almost lost in the wind, but unmistakable. Ben froze, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The voice came again, closer this time. "Help me." He whipped his head toward the jungle, eyes straining to see through the fog. His breath caught in his throat as he saw the figure again, standing just beyond the tree line, watching him with glowing eyes. But now there were others, several shadowy shapes lurking in the mist, all staring at him with those same glowing eyes. Panic surged through him. He slammed his foot on the gas and sped away, tires spinning on the slick road. The fog closed in around him, the whispers growing louder, overlapping into a cacophony of voices. "Help me. Come back." Ben drove faster, the jungle blurring past him, the voices echoing in his ears. It felt like the road stretched on forever, twisting and winding through the endless fog. His hands shook as he gripped the wheel, desperate to escape. Finally, after what felt like hours, the fog began to thin. The voices faded, replaced by the distant sound of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves. Ben's heart slowly began to calm as he emerged from the jungle, the lights of a small town glowing faintly in the distance. But as he glanced in the rearview mirror, his blood ran cold. In the back seat, something was sitting there, grinning at him with glowing eyes. He never made it to the town,